Welcome back to another episode of the Sky Society podcast. Today, I am so excited to be chatting with Agnes Majewska. She is the luxury client director at the Wall Street Journal. Welcome, Agnes.
Thank you. Hi, Natalie. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm very excited to go through your career journey from Stella McCartney to Discovery Networks, and then now here at the Wall Street Journal, where you've been for almost 7 years, which is crazy.
Time
Agnes
flies.
also started her career in Italy, and then transitioned over to now where she is in New York. So very excited to talk about that switch and that transition as well. But before we jump into all of the details on your career journey, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I am originally from Poland. I grew up in Warsaw, and I kind of had a journey where I kept kind of going further and further away from my home, first to Italy for university, and then I lived in London for a while, and then I made it over to the States. I have had kind of a long journey in fashion slash publishing. And I currently work at the Wall Street Journal where I handle the luxury accounts, which means I essentially look after the advertisers who are either in the watch or international fashion vertical. And I kind of help them reach our audience and kind of, make sure that they're happy with their marketing efforts at the Wall Street Journal. So I really kind of get to see a lot of their issues in marketing dreams as luxury brands. And then I also have to look after kind of what the Wall Street Journal is doing in terms of news and audience and, their own mission to growth.
That's incredible. I also think for people listening and you think of the Wall Street Journal, it's so much more than just a newspaper.
Mhm.
I love the newspaper. I before I lived in an apartment because it's so hard to get a newspaper to my door here. I would subscribe. I love the Wall Street Journal. It was my absolute favorite publication to read. And during the pandemic, I listened to the podcast, the Journal, like it was like religion every single day. I'd go there for updates on like what was going on. You have the magazine. So there's so much more than just a newspaper publication, which I feel like not everybody knows about.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to hear that within that, your niche is specifically within luxury. Do you find that, or and that you've worked, we'll get to your kind of other roles as well, but you've worked at Stella McCartney and then Discovery, but is luxury, do you think, different than working with other types of partners? Does it bring a different element to it, or what has your experience been like?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's funny. I kind of ended up here. Um, it's kind of you deal with a specific type of client. I feel like I feel very lucky to work with the CMOs and the marketing teams that I work with at these brands because they are perfectionists. I mean, they have very, it's different than working with a finance brand or a B2B brand or a lot of the other advertisers that the journal has because it's the people are demanding and they have a lot of pressure. I feel like fashion in general has so much pressure because of the fashion cycle and all the shows they put on and how quickly the collections come out. And it's not really an evergreen thing. They kind of constantly have to evolve and do something better. Brands go in and out of favor with the audiences, and they're always kind of competing with each other and having to stay at the top. When I first started doing this job, I started working a lot with our newspaper and our magazine, as you mentioned. Um, I found quite amazing to enter this world that I felt like I had grown up just observing. When you flip through a magazine and you see the like 25 pages of advertisers at the
Yes.
beginning, you're like, this is kind of amazing, but kind of absurd. Like, how does this happen? And then you get to working for a magazine and seeing the publishing side, and you understand how much competition there is between brands to be in the sequence or in the, in the order that they're in. And
Oh.
so much of the conversation with a lot of these brands is what they need to do to kind of be the first or the second or the third advertiser in the title. And when I first started working in this job, it kind of blew my mind in such a digital first world that we live in. Um, so it is really interesting. It's almost like I had a background in digital and I understood, a lot of what we do digitally, but I had to go back and understand how print works because it's still so
Yeah.
relevant.
That is so, I actually never thought about that when I looked at
Yeah.
the magazine. I remember, I feel like now that the world has become more digital. I'm not flipping through magazines as maybe much as I used to, but there's still, times I go, mostly when I'm like out places, whatever, looking through
Yeah,
magazines and you see all those beautiful photos and you see all the luxury brands in there, but I never would have thought that, it mattered so much to be at the front versus, a couple pages later.
yeah.
So for brands being in the front, is it just about, how big their budget is, or does more go into that?
It is a lot about how big the budget is, but it's also about the longevity of the partnership and the frequency with which they run. And it's essentially the way in which they support the Wall Street Journal and the publication and our
Okay.
general kind of franchises. And you kind of, once you have a position, you keep it until you lose it. So it's yours unless you like back out of it. And once you back out of it and you lose it, it's kind of lost forever because someone else will have come in and they become grandfathered. So
Okay.
yeah,
That's really
yeah,
interesting. Okay, so that makes sense because that kind of encourages more long-term partnerships and relationships with
exactly.
these brands versus just them trying to be
Exactly.
like, we're going to pay for one slot one time and then we're out of here. Okay,
Exactly.
super interesting. Okay, we're going to come back to your role here and dive a little bit deeper. But before we do that, I want to rewind. So you had two more roles before you started here. And you started in Italy, like you mentioned. So I want if you could actually tell me a little bit about your decision going from Poland to then to university in Italy and then starting your
Yeah.
career in Italy. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. It was kind of I kind of followed my intuition on that one. I think there was like a representative of the university that I went to, which is Bocconi, that came to our high school one day and, kind of gave us a presentation about the school. And I was like, oh, wow, that sounds so fascinating to study in Milan. I would probably learn the language and get to eat the food and get to like live the culture and live the dream. So I got into some schools in the UK and in the US, and I thought, how that's not very daring or brave. I already speak the language. I wouldn't really have to go through such like a culture shift. So I decided to kind of go out on my own to Italy. None of my other friends were going there. I didn't really know anyone. Um, and it was a great, great experience. I did my master's there, and as soon as I was done with my master's, um, I kind of wanted to use what was at hand, which is really the fashion industry. So I applied for an internship at Stella McCartney, um, which was a really fun way to dive into the world of kind of Milanese. You kind of get to really see what's happening in the streets of Milan that I had never maybe experienced as a student. And by then, I spoke the language and kind of understood how people thought and operated and worked. I think there's so many cultural nuances that you have to really understand to really be able to do a job in a foreign country where you might speak the language, but it's still a foreign language. Um, so I worked in the showroom, and it was like a PR marketing internship within the showroom in Italy. And I got to work with the magazines who needed samples for shoots for their own editorial stories. So I was on the other side for a
Mm,
while,
okay.
um, and presenting collections and things like that, and taking
Okay.
care of events and store openings and so on.
That sounds so fun, especially just out of college to be able to work in that space. I know Milan is huge for fashion. Was that part of your decision to choose Milan? Like, and did you know you wanted to go into fashion, or was that kind of a decision that you made later on once you graduated?
I made it later, definitely. I don't think I had any intention of working in fashion because I think I studied economics and management in university, and I really didn't know where I was going to go with that. I really didn't know the industries that I wanted to go into. At that point, I was like very excited about the fact that I could move to a new country and kind of become part of the culture and learn the language. So I think I was at that time thinking like maybe I'll move somewhere else, or maybe I'll go to Asia, or maybe I'll kind of try a completely different way of life. But then I thought, since I'm here, I might as well kind of dive into fashion.
Mhm.
It was a great experience. I had a very kind of specific team that was very demanding, made the environment maybe more stressful than it needed to be just because of the
Mhm.
nature of the job. And it kind of proved all of the ideas of working in fashion right. It didn't prove them wrong, unfortunately. So after a 6 month internship there, I was like, that was a good experience. Now I know I don't think I want to ever do again or put
Yeah.
myself through, which is great because sometimes you need to just try it to believe it.
Yeah.
And know, I think that was the toughest work experience I ever had in terms of just like emotional strain. And it definitely set me up to kind of be very calm in the future, and nothing can really stress me out now.
That's a beautiful takeaway from that. And I, like you said, how it taught you what you didn't want to do. That is just as important. And I think that's honestly how you
Totally.
figure out what you do want to do is kind of through
Yeah.
elimination. And you don't know it really until you try it. Like you said, maybe you had heard
Yeah.
about some things, but it's hard to really know until you're in it. I'm also curious. Have you heard of there's like a Netflix show called Emily in Paris? Have you heard of this show?
I've heard of the show. I have not seen the show,
Okay,
but I've heard of
so
the show.
I'm thinking about you, and she comes from, US and then gets this like fashion internship in Paris. But I'm curious from yours, because but she's facing so many obstacles around culture, essentially, of like her just like having a different background and culture, and she can
Yeah.
barely speak the language. I'm curious for you. I know obviously you didn't start from the US, you started from Poland, going in, working in Italy. It's not your first language. You don't
Yeah.
know the culture as well as other people. Did you find barriers? And then if you did, how did you overcome those?
So learning the language fluently in the time that I was in school helped me extremely. I think if I had any language barrier at that time, it would have been extremely difficult. I do think that being young and being right out of school, a lot of things get forgiven, and a lot of people will, excuse anything that's just a learning and progress. I think about this sometimes because now that I, mentor people, or I have people reporting directly into me, if they don't know something or they get stressed out about something, I'm like, just don't worry about it. Like, you're completely supposed to not know. You're not supposed to
Yeah.
know how to do this. You don't have to be like fully formed. You're also supposed to come with an opinion that is, off, completely different to what is expected as a norm. So I think just because of like youth and inexperience, I got away with a lot. Um, and I think that's kind of the way it should be. So I was lucky in the sense that I kind of had enough time to ingrain myself in what was right. But I think I still kind of kept my international perspective. I never, pretended to not be from where I am. And people just thought I had an interesting perspective on things.
Okay. I think that's interesting to hear. Because I think the idea of going to another country and starting your career is exciting, but it's also really
Yeah.
scary
Yeah.
because there's just so much that you don't know. I mean, I remember very minor experience, but like me learning Spanish all throughout school and then going and studying abroad in Spain, but like completely feeling like an outsider because just because I knew the language did not
Yeah.
mean that I felt like I belonged there. But I
Yeah.
know a lot of people like I think that it's like a dream. Oh my gosh, I would love to go, start my career there, but it seems scary. But I love kind of what you're saying there is like when you're young is kind of the time to do it too, because
Totally.
people will
Yeah.
excuse you just for your age. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
also just I think we have a confidence when we're young because of all the things we don't know that we have to
Yes.
use for those kind of
Yes.
experiences. You kind of don't know what you don't know, so you don't know what like you also have no idea what you're getting into the first time you start a job. Like I couldn't believe I remember I will never forget the night before my first day of work, like the Sunday night before my first full day of an internship. I couldn't believe I was about to go into an office and like be there for a full day and be there for 5 days. I had no idea what I was in for, and you just don't really know, so you're just full of confidence and like expectations, and it just ends up forming you and kind of shaking you around, but you come out of
Yeah.
it on the other side so much wiser.
I love that. I had a boss that would say that my greatest strength was my naivety because I didn't know what I didn't know. So I was very bold and brazen going into new
Exactly.
ideas and starting new
Exactly.
campaigns. I
Exactly.
remember, I forget, it was one of the sharks on Shark Tank, and he said one of like the, millionaire, billionaire ones. And he was like, if I knew what I knew now, I wouldn't have started my business. But when I started, I was
Exactly.
young and I knew nothing. So I did it and I had success.
Exactly.
So I think that's a really good thing to lean into when you're young is just that gives you so much confidence in areas.
Yeah.
It's that
And
night.
people aren't, like blasé about anything. Like I think one of the things about working in a big company or having worked for a long time is you forget the kind of ingenuity and excitement that people in their like early 20s or mid 20s come into with work, and they bring so many new ideas and they shake things up, and we need that. Like in any, no matter how much older or younger, like we need intergenerational conversations, and we need to like see things from a different perspective. And I sometimes worry that the people coming in aren't bold enough or outspoken enough that they kind of sit back and listen and learn. But I think I would definitely recommend anybody just to speak up and say what they think because their perspective is so fresh and it might like fizzle out just once you get like thrown into the system of working, you change your perspective a bit. So yeah, you should definitely just be bold and daring while you have it in you.
I love that. Okay, Agnes. So you were there for 6 months at Stella McCartney, realized that that was not the career path for you. So tell me about your switch over to Discovery Networks.
Yeah, that was a really kind of serendipitous moment that happened to me. So I had some friends who worked for a branded content like marketing agency at the time. So they were working on doing some production and making some social posts for, I believe it was a Jack Daniels branded content TV show. And I was like, how interesting that Jack Daniels, which is, a brand of alcohol, is producing this entire TV show in Italy about rock and roll music. And like, they're like, a documentary about rock and roll and they're going to Nashville and all these different places. And I was like, how cool that this brand is producing this just out of like, their brand. They're taking their brand and they're turning into something people can actually enjoy. And I remember asking my friends, being like, where is this streaming? Like, where is this airing? They're like, oh, we put this on the Discovery Channel in Italy. This is like something they've commissioned along with Jack Daniels. And I was like, that is so interesting. It's not just an advertisement of a product, it's so much more than that. So I remember I went on the Discovery Network's website and they had a branded content coordinator position open that was supposed to actually be on the other side and coordinate with the brands, all these productions. And I applied for this job and I got a reply from the woman who had just created this department. It was very new at the time in Italy to be kind of diving into this branded content idea. And she interviewed me and we just clicked. She was this amazing is this amazing woman. And she just thought I had exactly that kind of young, bold confidence that would, be what it took to kind of just go straight into this. She liked my international perspective. She liked that I wasn't Italian. She liked that I kind of, was multilingual. And she thought I was perfect for the job. And she gave me the job. I was so excited. I'll never forget. And I dove into this incredible job, which was essentially trying to bridge the gap between a sales team that looked after clients and an editorial team that decided what went on air on these TV channels in Italy. And we made all kinds of documentaries for brands that wanted to tell the story of like how their product was made or, um, you know, the opening of a new amusement park, like just film the behind the scenes of something and really tell a documentary story about it. So it was an incredible job. It was probably one of the most interesting things I've ever done. And I was given so much freedom to do it at such a young age, which I still kind of thank my old boss for that every day that she gave me the chance to do that.
What an interesting role. I never even knew that existed. I once interviewed someone who she worked at Anheuser-Busch and she was talking about how they were doing something similar where they're trying to produce content with some streaming services in LA. I forget she was very early in the process talking about how
Yeah,
she was using the Bear, I don't know if you know that TV show, as an example about
yeah,
how
yeah,
that TV show like shift culture and it increased. I think it was something to do with the sandwiches. I forget exactly what product she said, but like, global sales were like super up for this one category of product because of the influence of the show. And now they're trying
yeah.
to do something really similar with beer and trying to make, I forget if they're trying to build something with like soccer or something. But that's
Okay.
interesting because I'm imagining, like why would Jack Daniels like produce something on rock and roll? And I'm assuming it has something very similar of just trying to do marketing, but not in the traditional way, which is so innovative.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and they were really trying to tell a story so that people could identify with them for
Yeah.
more than just their product. Be like, oh, these are
Yeah.
all these people that love rock and roll will now choose our product.
That is super interesting. So doing this branded content, and I'm assuming this, then you went well, getting ahead of myself, but then you went on to do more partnerships at Wall Street Journal. So
Yeah,
this is kind of what introduced you to the world of partnerships
exactly.
and brand partnerships.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about what a career like that entails, or what did that role entail? What did you love about brand partnerships? What did you learn about partnerships?
Yeah, so it was because it was just my boss and I, we were a very small team. We had to wear a lot of hats. I had to like meet clients. It was a lot of like asking clients about what their pain points are. What do they want to do? What do they want to communicate? What do they feel like they're not able to communicate in an ad? What is a big brand story they're trying to tell? And it was really exciting to speak to these clients, because usually clients are like, I have a budget and I have a campaign and this is what I need to do. That's kind of like a normal, marketing to sales conversation. In this case, they kind of got to put that all aside and get really creative and really excited, and have a bigger conversation that was, maybe these projects sometimes took a year and a half to produce. So it really taught me about the skill of what a meeting could be when you really needed to get to know somebody, make them trust you, develop a relationship with them, and get something, create something together, co-create something really. And then once you kind of had the client excited and on board, the second step was then convincing the 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 TV channel and the internal operation that was going to be a good product that people wanted to watch and that people would find interesting. So it was like a dual sales role where I had to sell externally, and then once that I did that, I had to sell it internally. Um, and I had to really kind of figure out what made people tick, what was in it for them, and how I could convince them that it was a good decision, it was going to make everybody happy. So I think that, and it now the world of branded content and like creating, there's content studios within every big media company that do this, and it's super organized. There's a project manager and a marketing team and creative directors, and it's all super structured and everybody knows their role. But like still 10 years ago, it was a bit of a just figure it out and make it happen, and there's not really any rules, and comply by these legal standards in the country. But apart from that, just kind of see what you can get out of it. So we really had to be kind of crafty and creative.
That sounds so fun, to be able to do that and I'm sure if there's just two people on the team, you had immense ownership over that.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your boss kind of gave you this incredible opportunity and that you're very thankful for that. I in interviews, I think it's super, super important to be able to identify if a team you're going to be joining is going to be helping you advance your career, right? It's just as much. I mean, I think the team and the people are even more important than the company that you go work for. I have
Definitely.
lots of people that I know that ended up working, leaving a company, joining a new one, their boss, terrible, hated their job, hated their life, ended up leaving. So do you have any
Yeah.
advice when you're in an interview process and you're gauging a new
Yeah.
opportunity, how to tell if this, your new boss or your new team is going to be something that's aligned with you and your career goals?
Yeah, that's so important. Um, it's really hard in the moment in which you're in an interview and you really want the job and you really want the opportunity and you really need a paycheck to stop and kind of sense check that everything feels right, that the environment feels right, and the people seem to be happy in the break room and they seem like they're smiling, and the person who you called you on the phone from HR seemed, caring and not in a bad place in their own work life. And then when you're having a conversation, especially when you're super young, you don't really feel like you're in the position to interview your manager. You really have to. You're really trying to get an understanding if the things that are important to you are also important for them, and if you align. Obviously, as I've gotten older and more experienced, this has become much easier. And I feel like now I'm conducting the first interview and it's not being conducted with me. But I wish I had done even more of that when I was younger, just to kind of set my expectations for who I was and what I was excited about, and if that was going to be, an opportunity for me to exceed at that. Um, so yeah, I think just kind of try to use your intuition, and if something feels like a red flag or you feel like you're not being maybe treated with the respect you deserve, or it's just not matching up with the expectations that you have, really, look into that, ask around, maybe I always request a conversation with a peer. So if I'm being offered a job or I feel like I'm progressing in the interview process, I will ask the hiring manager if I could get a call set up with somebody that would be working on my level in some way, just to talk to them about, you will be able to get a sense from them about the work environment, the work-life balance, the expectations, the levels of stress that they're under, that a manager probably won't show you or give you. So that would be my recommendation as well, if you really need like
Yeah.
a second opinion.
That is so brilliant. I've actually never heard anybody give that advice, and I love that advice. I mean, it's almost like if you were making, I think, any other big decision in your life, you may do that. Like sometimes if
Right.
you're gonna, I know with my friends, I had a friend, she saw an Instagram ad for a bikini. She sends it to us like, hey, have you gotten this bikini yet? Like, what do you think of it? Like, like, have you guys heard from it so she can talk to someone that's,
Yeah,
worn it? And I think it's the same thing,
totally.
like you said, when you're going into a career, into a new job, to ask someone that would be on your same level to get a good sense of what their experience is working at the company and to put aside, the excitement of a new offer and also to be realistic about what that reality would look like for you. In
Yeah.
those peer calls, what types of questions do you ask?
Yeah. I would ask, what do you like most about this job and what do you like least about this job? I think you kind of have to be very direct and put them on the spot and make sure that they give you an honest answer on both fronts. Um, because a lot will come from that. I think maybe people don't expect that. I think maybe people will think you're trying to just sell yourself and prove to yourself that you want to be part of the company. I guess it's important to not come off as that's important to come off as very confident about your own self-worth and why, you should be a member of the team. Um, what else would I ask? I guess I always want to ask about the environment, the working environment, the interpersonal dynamics, if there are a lot of politics, if there are things that I should be aware of. I think I try to be as, honest as possible with my questions and see what I get back. That will also be telling. If you don't get a response or somebody doesn't really want to give you any details, that in itself is an answer too.
Okay, I love that. And then at what point are you asking this? Are you asking this like in the second or third round interview? Or are you waiting until you get an offer and then asking for this?
I would usually ask this if you have it depends. I've had interview processes where my hiring manager, actually this has happened to me a lot of times, and this is usually a very good sign. If you're going through the interview process with your hiring manager and like an HR person and things are getting scheduled and they're very formal, and then you have a way of actually speaking to your hiring manager on the side. I'll never forget when I first got my job at the Wall Street Journal in London. Um, the person who hired me called me on my personal number right after the interview and said like, hey, I really, I shouldn't just be contacting you outside of this process, but I didn't want you to have to wait to hear back from me. I really think you're great for this role and I just wanted you to know that. So sometimes you start to doubt yourself and you let your mind spiral and you start to think like, oh no, maybe they don't like me and maybe I shouldn't work there. So I really appreciated that he just wanted like to have a human relationship with me right away. That would have probably been the situation in which I had been like, listen, I really enjoyed speaking with you too, and I think I'm great for this role. Would you mind if I got to meet other people on the team? It would really help me understand what, the working environment is like. So I
Okay.
think when you kind of have developed a bit more of a personal relationship.
Okay, and then I like how you phrased it there. So let's say that, someone's listening right now and like, okay, how would I ask this? The way you phrased it there, I think was perfect of like, can I speak with someone on the team? I would just love to learn more about what the environment is like working there. So you're phrasing it very positive. You're not like, I want to, in some negative way, trying
Yeah,
to say I want to vet you out, but just being like, I would
yeah,
just love to learn and I'm curious. I think that's a really
yeah.
good way to phrase it.
Yeah, and I think if there's a healthy environment, no one would ever, take that
Yeah.
opportunity away. So that would also be very telling. And if there's something off where they say, oh, no, that's not appropriate, or no, we won't allow that, I would question if that's the kind of place I want to work in anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Okay. Amazing. I love that advice and I'm gonna have to steal that from you and start sharing it because I've never
For
heard that
sure,
before.
for sure.
Okay, so you were here for 3 years, Agnes, before you moved on to where you now are at the Wall Street Journal, and you mentioned kind of a little bit about how your positive, interview process was there. But
Yeah,
can you tell me about your decision to leave Discovery and move over to the Wall Street Journal?
yeah. So I came to a point at Discovery where I had kind of reaped all the benefits of having all of this responsibility at quite a young place in my career. And I felt like I needed to move to a bigger city with an English speaking opportunity in order to then like grow my career or make it accelerate a little faster. I think I felt if anyone has worked in kind of the Italian world, especially if you're young and you're foreign and you're female, you tend to get treated a little bit. It's not a merit-based kind of job. You kind of need to know somebody. It's a little bit, there's a bit more nepotism, generally speaking. So I felt like this was a really good time for me to use this incredible experience that I had had, and take it to a bigger brand or a bigger publisher that was a little bit more international. So um, I got an interview with the Wall Street Journal in London. So the London office is like the headquarters outside of the US, and they were looking for somebody to help them grow their partnership. So they were essentially looking for a person who would know the European market quite well, ideally coming from one of the Southern European countries where they needed to kind of grow their business. And they needed somebody who didn't sell print or digital advertising, but was able to sell an idea or a bigger concept to one of these brands that was a little not trusting. And I said, well, how perfect. Not only do I speak the language, but I know how an Italian CMO thinks. I could help with your luxury brands. I think I could help with a lot of the fashion brands that are based there and get them to kind of evolve into the future. So it was sort of serendipity. It's one
Yeah.
of those things that I couldn't have really planned or foreseen. It just sort of happened. And it was really, really, really interesting. I got to do that for a few years. I did a lot of work with brands out of France and Italy, and I also traveled to Africa and the Middle East to kind of help a lot of these brands tell their stories with the Wall Street Journal, with the content studio that we had in house. So on one hand, I felt like my role got a little smaller because I wasn't doing everything because there was a team that was already built out to support this kind of growth. But I got to do a much bigger scale of projects with the team and at the journal.
That is incredible. And it's interesting to hear each of your career switches because every opportunity that you got was looking for someone just like you. And you kind of found it. And it was, like you said,
Yeah,
a match that you never really could have planned.
yeah,
Um, I'm I'm curious because I think that there's a lot of people when they do want to make that career switch, they may not immediately find a perfect what it's I mean, it seems like these were like really beautiful matches that you found for yourself. Were they was like you decided that you wanted to leave Discovery on like Monday and you found this opportunity on Friday.
not at
Can you like
all.
share what that looked like? Because
Yeah,
I think a part of it is also like when I say luck is like there's luck that you get on
yeah,
your own and there's luck that you create for yourself. And I think it's
yeah.
the same with these partnerships. So or these matches. So if you could kind of speak to that.
Yeah, no, of course, that's also another thing that's important. I think that now that I've worked for 10 years, I can look back and see how these things all fit perfectly into place like a puzzle. But when you're in the moment and you're looking for your next career move, you're terrified and think that the experience that you had was a waste of time because how are you ever going to find anything that's better or that, fits your skill set? No, I mean, I was definitely looking for a new opportunity. I wanted to move to London and try my luck there. I was also interested in moving to New York at the time, but it definitely took some weeks, if not months, for me to find something that was a match. I did some interviews in the meantime, and it just didn't feel like the right fit for some other um, jobs that I interviewed for in the meantime, which makes, it's very confusing because you're being offered a role or you're interviewing, you don't really like the people, you're not really sure if you want to do that job. But in that moment, you think like maybe this is the path for me. I just can't see it yet. Usually it's just not. If it doesn't feel right or you feel like the person that you're speaking to, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for them. And it'll usually end up being that way. So that taught me to believe that if you are being offered a job, that means they see something in you, which is likely the reason for a good fit.
Yeah.
Um, so it definitely takes some time and some like belief that things are going to kind of work out. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I love that. So you decide that you've reached your growth limit here. And I also always love acknowledging and appreciating the fact that when you do realize that you've reached your growth potential, that you take the risk and leave, because I think leaving is also very scary. And a lot of people will stay at roles for longer than they maybe should
Oh
have
yeah,
because they feel really comfortable there. But if you want, pay growth, you have to leave. If there's a lot of data that supports that leaving is really beneficial for your career. Not that you need to do it all the time, but that it is necessary sometimes if you want to move.
definitely.
So definitely want to acknowledge that it's super important that once you feel like you've realized your growth, to accept that and then to move on.
Yeah.
So you go to the Wall Street Journal and you start there within their partnerships, and you made a switch, right? So now you're working in another country. So now you're over in the UK and you're there for a little while before you move over to New York. So can you talk to me about kind of what your role looked like in the UK, and then why you decided, you're still at the Wall Street Journal, but why you decided to go to the New York office.
Yeah. So my partnership's role in the UK was something that is called a sales support role. So there are salespeople who work within like the commercial side of any publisher who are responsible for an account list, and they need to make sure that they're hitting their targets every single year. And they have control over the relationship with the client. I was the partnerships kind of lead who needed to support the sales team in selling different products. So I would go with them to meetings and I would say, you guys should do an event with our CEO council board, or you guys should write custom content piece. It's your anniversary. Why are you just doing traditional advertising? So I was kind of this voice in the room that was always trying to push them to do something out of the box, which was fantastic. But it's very funny how something starts off as a challenge and very interesting. After a few years, you kind of finish a cycle and you want something else out of that opportunity. So by the end of the 3 years, I wanted to be the salesperson who had full control over the relationship and was able to kind of decide everything and didn't need to be invited to a meeting as kind of a plus one.
Okay.
So, and I had also learned from all of the different types of businesses that I was working on, which ones I felt like I had kind of the most intuition about. So I felt like the luxury brands from Paris that were based in Paris and Milan, just maybe because of my experience in Italy, maybe because of my short internship at Stella McCartney, maybe because of my interests and what I was drawn to. I just felt like I performed best when working with those clients. So an opportunity opened up in the New York office for a client partner in luxury sales, which meant that I would be in New York handling an account list of luxury brands, and they would be my responsibility to, manage their accounts and grow the revenue and just handle the partnership from beginning to end. So I think I got to a point where I wanted the full accountability. And I was kind of ready for a new, a new opportunity for growth. Obviously, there was, growth. It was a better salary. It was a better position. Oftentimes, the U.S. pays better than the U.K. So it just also became an opportunity where I was like, given I had to make a decision if I was interested in the job or not. And I also just took a leap of faith and figured it was worth trying.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting to hear, and also interesting to hear how the partnership side works and how there's multiple players within, in each brand partnership. Do you
Yeah.
find that partnership, because I know your role is kind of a mix of both marketing and sales. So for
Yeah.
someone like interested in a career like that, I would assume that sales is still like having those sales skills is still very important and crucial to your success in the role.
Yeah. I feel like I'm a lot of the time met with a lot of confusion when I speak to, people that I've just met or friends that I have when I tell them I work in a sales role with fashion in the Wall Street Journal. They're very confused with how that works or what skills I really have. And I think maybe sometimes sales gets a bit of a bad rep for exactly what that means. When you're working in a sales role with something like what I do with advertising, you're essentially kind of responsible for relationship management more than kind of
Mm.
sales. You're not kind of pushing anything on anybody. You're kind of making sure that the person that you work with gets everything that they need. And it does take a lot of creativity because sometimes you have to think outside of the box and create a whole new product just to make sure that you can kind of earn their trust and they can get what they need. So it is analytical in some ways. I mean, I'm not working on the creative side where I'm just coming up with concepts for, some of this custom content or branded content, but I get to make sure that I understand what the client really needs and I can translate that for the creative team. And then at the end of the day, it is my responsibility if the client is happy or not. So when I send them the final results, they tell me if they're happy and if they want to renew the partnership or not. So it's essentially the role that has the most responsibility, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And so now you have more ownership over kind of that relationship.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. Makes sense. And then one thing I'm also super curious about is you not just like in the US, people will move states for jobs, but you've moved countries for jobs multiple different times. And I'm also curious on just the social and personal aspect of moving to different countries every couple of years. And if you have any advice of like when you make this move for a job and now you're in a new country, how do you get acclimated? How do you meet people? How do you not,
Yeah.
get overwhelmed or stressed with those switches? What advice do you have there?
Yeah. It definitely gets a bit harder to do that and start from scratch the older you get because, well, I mean, I always laugh that I think such an important skill to have is to be able to make friends when you're like older and you need to start,
Yeah.
again, you're not in college anymore and you're not, people make friends in the workplace all the time, but sometimes they want to have a bit of a break from the people they have at work in their personal life. So I think I've always moved to places like my move to London. I knew people there. It's such a big city. It was such a cosmopolitan city. People had moved there from all kinds of places that I had lived before. So I had friends and I grew a community and friends of friends became my friends. So you kind of have to just account for the first 6 to 12 months kind of being a bit stressful, not exactly making you feel as at home as you were in the last place. You're going to ask yourself a lot of questions like, did I make the wrong decision? But I think a move can either be justified by, a personal motive, like I'm moving to be with my friends, I'm moving to be with my family, I'm moving to be with a partner, or I really love this job and it's going to make everything else worth it. I think if both of those things are missing, it'll be really tough to
Mhm.
be happy there or be kind of not, feel lonely. My advice is don't go completely without knowing anyone, not a single person. You have some kind of oasis of, refuge. Um, but make sure that the move is really worth it for the career and for the job and or for the boss or for the mentor or for some reason that's personal that will, make you feel fulfilled most
Yeah, that
days.
that you can hold on to when it's being really difficult, of like reminding yourself
Yeah.
why you did it. Is it
Yeah.
also hard to leave because you said that you built this community for yourself in London? Is it hard leaving and just like,
Yeah.
I'm not going to see these people for a long time?
Yeah, it is really tough. But it was also interesting for me because it was during the pandemic, so the
Okay.
world was a bit locked down and this opportunity kind of happened like right in 2020. So I kind of made it, I thought, this is how it is right now. I have the chance to go to the US. I'm just gonna do it right now because I'm working from home anywhere and it's really
Mhm.
weird. But yeah, it is really hard to leave everybody kind of behind and just start again. So you really once again have to know why you're doing it. I mean, nothing is forever. You can always kind of go
Yeah.
back. I think
True.
not burning any bridges, like, so many people that I know have left companies and gone back. Um, the Wall Street Journal is one of those places where people are boomerangs and leave and come back continuously after experiences that they've had elsewhere. So nothing is to say you can't kind of change your mind later.
Last question on this topic, because it's so
Yeah.
interesting to me, is what can you describe the work culture comparatively to all three countries? Because I feel like US sometimes gets a bad rep for just being like everybody's work oriented and it's super stressful, and especially New York, I know gets that even more of a rep. But I'm curious
Yeah.
what your experience has been with the work cultures in US, UK, and Italy.
Yeah. It, I mean, I also don't want to kind of perpetuate that narrative because there are exceptions to the rule, and maybe New York is also the most extreme version of that. I feel like since the pandemic, maybe people have also kind of gotten their priorities shifted around a little
Yeah.
bit, and work-life balance has become a little bit more important. So I kind of can't imagine what it was like before, but in Italy, there's definitely a desire for people to get to know each other on a very human, personal level at work, which I have found is not the case in the US as much. Um, People are really curious about who you are. They want to know where you're from and how you got here. And I used to get so many questions about, why am I here? And, why do I speak Italian? And people are very kind of person first. I always laugh at this anecdote. When you go to a meeting in Italy, you really do have small talk and chat about personal stuff for the first 15 minutes of the meeting, and then you move on to work. Whereas in the US, it's kind of seen as inefficient and a waste of time to do something like that.
Yeah.
So there is a difference between, what is the priority. Um, the UK is funny because I feel like British are known for being very formal and polite and kind of, having like this perfect facade, but they're also definitely very curious about you, want to get to know their colleagues. There is a bit more of like a camaraderie in the office, I feel.
Hmm.
Whereas, yeah, in New York, I would say people are much more career driven and kind of focused on their own personal journey and generally just more individualistic. Italy is known as being one of the most like community driven countries, I think, along with like Japan, if I've heard the statistic correctly. So people just think about themselves more as a team, whereas in the US, people
Mhm.
think about themselves more as like me, I.
Yeah. Yeah, super interesting. I remember my study abroad moment that made me think of things differently was I remember in Spain whenever my host mom would ask us like, "How are you?" She really wanted to know. She didn't just want
Yeah.
good. That wasn't enough, right? In the US, how are you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Good. There's like, so tell me more, tell me more.
Yeah. They
And
have time to hear the whole
yeah,
story.
yeah. Okay, super interesting. Well, Agnes, this has been honestly incredible just hearing about your experience. It is so unique and so inspiring. I'm very grateful for you to be able to share that with us today. My last question for you before I let you go is any last advice you want to share with younger women looking to potentially have a career like yours?
Yeah, I would say I think just be confident in your own specific skill set because you might not see where that's going to take you right now, but one day I promise you'll look back and it'll all make sense how you kind of got to where you got with your specific interests or passions or experiences or travels or something that you don't even know. There is people do still work for like personal connections. You might have an interview and you might tell them something about somewhere you've been and they've been there too and they'll remember you for it. I think just
Mhm.
believe in your own story and put it out there and you'll kind of be connected with the people that um, are meant to pick it up. So I really believe in that and just have patience and like kind of have faith that it will work out. Don't get discouraged by sending like 25 or 100 applications. We've all done that. It just looks like a nice story when people have their positions on LinkedIn. Like no one's journey was easy. Everyone got a million rejections. And just reach out to people. I get people who like write me on LinkedIn all the time because they just want to have a conversation and they just want an opinion. Never stop doing that. All people are human. Doesn't matter if they're a CEO or a director of something, just like reach out to them and ask them for advice. That's the benefit of being young, is like people will help you because they've all been there at some point.
I love that. I absolutely agree. I think that's awesome advice, an incredible way to end an already incredible episode. Thank you again, Agnes. This has
Thank
been so
you.
much fun.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.